Tja, liebe An- und Abwesende, das ist hier sozusagen der Begrüßungsspruch immer dann. Er ist natürlich, Sie wissen es, er ist geklaut, er ist von Einstein, wie war das, bei der Radiowoche 1923, Monika, stimmt das? Doch, ich glaube es, 1923, also bei der Berliner, bei der berühmten Berliner Radiowoche, und da hat er eben über den Äther die An- und Abwesenden, also sein Publikum im Saal und sein Publikum in der Welt begrüßt. Das Publikum in der Welt, das begrüßen wir auch, das kann nachher den Stream gucken, wenn er denn auf dem Netz ist, aber es geht darum, dass das Interesse an deinem Vortrag, Petros, so groß ist, dass wir nebenan im Rudolf-Wolf-Saal eine Übertragung machen, wo deine Fangemeinde, die dich eigentlich sozusagen atmosphärisch erleben wollte, jetzt doch sich in den Saal zurückgezogen hat. Aber ich bitte natürlich dann zur Fragerunde am Schluss hier in den Saal zu kommen. Ja, ich freue mich, dass wir zum Abschluss eines langen Tages, wir hatten heute von Beiratssitzungen, Fellow-Treffen mit Speed-Dating und mit Programm-Shaping und ich weiß nicht was allem, wir hatten einen sehr langen und einen sehr ausgiebigen und einen sehr ergiebigen Tag und den wollten wir von Anfang an krönen mit einem Vortrag unseres Fellows Petros Koumoutsakos. Das war so geplant, es hätte fast nicht geklappt, weil Petros irgendwie fast das Reden vergangen wäre. Er ist jetzt aber beim Zahnarzt gewesen oder beim Kieferorthopäden gewesen. Er kann jetzt widersprechen, er ist noch ein bisschen sediert, haben wir festgestellt, aber ich glaube, es ist soweit wiederhergestellt, dass er den heutigen Abendvortrag hier halten kann. Wir haben ja am Collegium Helveticum seit vergangenem Oktober eine Fellowperiode unter dem Label der Digital Societies eingeläutet und haben begonnen, den Modus unseres Arbeitens und Tuns, nämlich denjenigen der Transdisziplinarität, zunächst einmal zu bedenken. Und haben dann eben gesagt, dass wir in diesem Jahr dann mit Vorträgen aus der Fellowschaft, aber natürlich auch aus dem Rest der Welt sozusagen in die vertiefte Auseinandersetzung mit dem Thema Digital Societies einsteigen wollen. Und es freut uns besonders, dass Petros sich geopfert hat, diese erste Collegium Helveticum Lecture, wie wir das betitelt haben, zu machen. Die meisten von Ihnen kennen ihn oder haben sich auf dem Internet schlau gemacht. Das ist ja heute so, dass man Vorstellungen immer kürzer halten soll, weil es gibt Konkurrenzinformationsmöglichkeiten, also der ausführlichen Art. Deswegen, ich mache es wirklich in aller Kürze. Petros Koumoutsakos hat Schiffsbau studiert zunächst, ist dann nach dem Schiffsbau in die Luft gegangen und hat auch noch, also erstmal noch den Schiffsmaschinenbau dazu genommen, dann ist er in die Luft gegangen und hat Luftfahrt, Flugtechnik studiert und darin auch promoviert und da ist auch noch die angewandte Mathematik dazugekommen. Also man sieht's, also terra marique sozusagen war er unterwegs und ist dann schließlich auch in die Luft gegangen. Geografisch gesehen hat ihn seinen Weg von Griechenland über die USA, also Caltech, Stanford, die NASA, nach Zürich gebracht, wo er seit 1997 tätig ist und seit 2002 seinen aktuellen Job als Computational Scientist an der ETH macht. Dann kommen ganz viele Ehrungen, alles nachlesen, ganz viele Fellowships, alles nachlesen von Tokio über Dänemark, über das Caltech, über Harvard, über das MIT. Also was in einer erfolgreichen Wissenschaftlerbiografie so dazugehört, das macht er. Umso mehr freut es uns, dass er sich in den nächsten eben gut 4 Jahren uns hier am Collegium als Fellow mit seinen Ideen einbringen wird in unsere Fellow-Projekte und in unsere Überlegungen. Und heute eben wird er seinen Vortrag, also ich verzichte jetzt darauf zu sagen, dass er 400 Artikel geschrieben hat, was ein Hirschindex ist und so weiter, alles nachlesen. Wird heute über Computing Dot, Data Double Dot, Society Science Triple Dot, Society on Connecting the Dots sprechen. Petros, ich darf dir das Wort und die Bühne übergeben.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, fellow fellows. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to have the opportunity to make this presentation. As you may see already, I have already changed the title of my talk. You see no computing, you see computers, but there will be computing in a second. And actually, I would like to argue that everything is computing. So, on connecting the dots, so here is one possibility of connecting the dots, and the dots between science, society, and data. It's something that we are all aware. What is new in the last, let's say, 60 or 70 years is computers. These computers has actually enhanced all these connections, and what is actually very, very important is the particular connections between computers and society and data. So what I would like to do today is I would like to show you examples of how science connects computers and data, and then I would like to take lessons from there and try to discuss and probably present maybe some suggestions on how one could go about on society, computers, and data. And as I mentioned before, these are the elements, and computing is in fact connecting the dots. So let's start with computers, and let's see what's the beginning of computers. So the beginning is quite dramatic, and I'll be talking about the beginning after World War II. So this is...
There it goes. The fourth atomic bomb has been successfully detonated.
So this is the result of the Manhattan Project, and the Manhattan Project was successful because people were for the first time able to implement and employ computers. So this is something that is behind the atomic bomb, and this is actually...
Good evening. I'm David Wayne, and as all of you are, I'm concerned with the world in which we're going to live tomorrow. A world in which a new machine, the digital computer, may be of even greater importance than the atomic bomb.
We will be revisiting this fantastic video that I got from the MIT archive. So you will see what we are concerned today about computers is not new. It's about older than me even, not by much, but a little bit. Now about computers. Here is a personal story on computers. These are all computers on which I have programmed hands-on, starting from my first years in Schiffbau. We had very old machines, then we went to Apollos, then I wrote my thesis on the next computer, I did my simulations on an XMP, then I was a guinea pig on doing the first parallel simulations at Caltech on the Delta, the Gamma before that, and the Paragon, ASCII Red, and then finally the NEC, the SX5 and the SX6, and then after that I became professor, and I did not program anymore, but then I got great students, and my great students, they did great things. And here is one of the biggest machines on Earth, or was in 2013. And this is the Sequoia, and this is where I will be talking about later, where we have one of the world records in simulation. Here is another record that we hold on an even bigger machine, the Titan in Oak Ridge, and none of this will be possible had we not have access to some fantastic machines and people down at CSES. Here's the Pitch Dane, one of the best computers in terms of environmental signature. Now about computers. So computers are a disruptive technology, and it affects many parts of human endeavor. So you know, for example, that computers came in our life when the Deep Blue beat Kasparov, and what people don't know very much is that the Deep Blue beat Kasparov because of a bug. At some point, the code that was in the machine, there was some moves that they were made there, and then the code was stuck, and then when the code was stuck, just by randomly would pick a move, and apparently this was a brilliant move that Kasparov could not believe that this is anybody with like a machine would be able to do this move, but apparently it was a mistake, it was a random mistake. Nevertheless, computers are doing great. They are able to do and go and beat people who play Go, and here's also an interesting story about Go. Down there you will see a person called Tore Greipel. He was a student or a postdoc in my lab, and he's one of the authors of this AlphaGo. And Tore, when he came to my lab about 17 years ago, he wanted to do Go, and I was telling him, look, don't do Go, do other things. There's other more important things. Where he has a paper in Nature, I do not. So, and finally, it's not only about games of logic and strategy, but there's also other games, and that came out from the LA Times today. So this is about poker, and this is a computer that has beat people on Texas Hold'em, so this is one more success, if you like, for computers. Now, the second element in this diagram is data. And data is everywhere, and data is being produced in massive amounts. Today, there is about 5 billion devices that are interconnected. There is 1 billion people that are interconnected. There's these humongous numbers, and these numbers are only growing. So this is a big problem. It's something that we cannot avoid, and it's something that we have to address. So I think this is an important element of this discussion. And then another thing that is important is physical laws. And physical laws is the things like what made the modern science, and this is Newton, and these are the equations of Newton written for fluid mechanics. These are the Navier-Stokes equations. And what Newton actually did was able to formalize theories and actually to present us with a theory of gravitation, was able to give us some kind of causal relationships between phenomena by a few principles, a few physical laws. And then there is a society, and society is many things. There is no image that can describe society, and society includes industry, and includes academia, it includes government, and of course we can talk about the society of the whole Earth. We can try to focus and talk about the society of Europe. We can talk about the society in Switzerland, or even talk about the society around the Lake Zürich. So this is a big topic, and I will not be able to address all of it. I will have just a very, very small part of the interface of some parts of society with computers and with data. And finally, what is the WIS, or what we try to do with computers? We try to compute for X. And I think many of the scientists that they develop mathematics or simple algorithms or more complex algorithms, in the end, they would like to see the possibility of addressing problems in energy, addressing problems in poverty, water, and even complexity itself that we impose on ourselves through computers. So, what are the axes of computing? What are the axes of our knowledge? So I discussed earlier about causal, universal causal relationships, and I discussed also about data, and data actually give us empirical relationships. In one case, we have physical laws, and these physical laws, they can tell us, they can move forward and be predictive, and we can analyze things. But then we can also acquire knowledge through more statistical processes by analyzing data. So a lot of the science that has happened in the past, this century and the previous one in particular, was more concerned with gravitational laws, Navier-Stokes equations, and we had a lot of fundamental about first principles, so we did a lot of work on problems that they had first principles. What's happening today is thanks to sensing technologies, thanks to databases, thanks to people who curate this data, we have access to massive amounts of data, and finally we can go into this other type of knowledge, this empirical knowledge. Now, the two things have not been separated in the human mind from the times of all times, and even Copernicus and Kepler and others, they use these combinations in order to identify how many planets and the trajectories of the planets, so there's nothing new. What is new is that we have unprecedented amounts of data, and we have a lot of knowledge that has been gathered over the past years. So there's a lot of problems, or maybe few problems that are up there, where we have a lot of data and a lot of first principles, or whenever we are able to combine the two, I would call these easy problems. And then there's, of course, other problems where we have no principles and no data, and I call this the domain of lawyers and doctors, because they have to deal with that, and that's why we pay them what we pay them. But nevertheless, even this domain is starting to disappear because, okay, today every computer, every airplane that you fly has been done through a simulation, but there's other things that are simulated and been profiting from computers and data. There's this article in Nature where actually you can get dermatologist-level classification of skin cancer. And what you see here in this image, besides being ugly, is you see how difficult it is to distinguish between benign and malignant indicators of tumors. And now there are machines who are able to do this classification, either outperforming humans. And talking about lawyers, their time has come. People can do in a few seconds what lawyers would spend 360,000 hours to compile by going through different documents. Of course, we are talking about things that are automated. Of course, there's a lot of asterisks that you can put next to that, but these are results, these are new things that we are facing today. And there's other things that we can do, and it's actually, there is an example of a simulation and data together that has been done by NASA, where we are able to see the oceans, and we can see all the circulations in the oceans, and we can see them over the years, and this is about the synthesis of the two domains that I told you. This is the green star, where you have principles, and you enhance these principles with data, and you get wonderful pictures like these that tell you about the Earth. This is what people try to do with the weather. There's many domains of science that are trying to do this. So let me tell you a little bit more specifically now what we have been doing and what experiences we have acquired. So I'll be telling you about the prediction game, and the prediction game is kind of a change in the worlds of Turing about the imitation game. So the prediction game is that you have first principles, and you take these first principles, you put them in the computer, and you can predict. So here are some simulations of aquaporine. Aquaporine are small channels in our cells, and if this little protein that you see up there does not move appropriately, there's terrible diseases that can happen. We can also do simulations of fish swimming that you will see later, and then we can do also simulations of galaxies and the death of stars and all these kind of things. So we can go over 18 orders of magnitudes. And all these three things basically have been done with the same type of numerical methods. You don't need to necessarily try to do a lot of different things. That's another power of this prediction game. But there are problems. And the problems that are hidden behind all these wonderful movies and all these big numbers that I'm telling you is that we don't use computers as well as we should, or many people don't do that, and it's actually a big, big challenge. So there is Moore's law, and Moore's law tells you that every 18 months, the power of computers is doubling. So that's what the hardware is giving you. And then people are writing code, they are developing numerical methods, and they create software, and they take this software and they deploy it onto the computers. And the story is that there is a gap, and the gap is that we fail to harness the capability of computers, and about 90% of the software is using 10% of the capabilities of hardware. In fact, I have a wonderful machine with 4 processors here. I'm using less than 1%, and the rest is a waste of energy of what I'm doing right here. So this is a big issue, and it's becoming a bigger issue if you consider that if you want to produce one desktop, you have to spend that much material. And also what is important is that today, the emissions that are coming from information and communication technologies in Germany are bigger than the emissions that are coming because of air traffic. So the issue of computing and the issue of people not using computers appropriately is something that is often overlooked, and it's something that every time you do a Google search, you are producing 1 gram of CO2 into the atmosphere. So it should be worth it of something what you have been looking for. So we try to address this. So we try to close this gap, and we try to show that it's possible to go above this 10%. And we try to do that by going back to Schiffbau, as Thomas said, naval architecture, propellers. When propellers rotate very fast, then what happens is that some of the liquid becomes air or vapor, and when the vapors are moving somewhere else and they collapse because of the external pressure, you can get huge, huge pressures. And these pressures can damage propellers. They can destroy propellers by just these little bubbles. And speaking of dentists, sometimes when you go to the dentist and he cleans your teeth, he's using this principle of cavitation collapse, as we call it, in order to clean all the debris from your teeth. It's little bubbles that are coming out of the nozzle, and when they're coming out, they collapse and they remove all the bad things from your teeth. And people are using this idea. This is from Kostas Kousios in Oxford University to deliver drugs. For example, when you deliver a drug in an area that is near, through the blood, in an area that is near the tumor, you try to destroy the tissue that goes between the blood vessels and the tumor, And the way you do that is that you inject some bubbles in the blood, and then through some kind of ultrasound, you induce cavitation. The cavitation destroys the tissue between the blood vessels and the tumor, and the drugs are able to reach their place. So what we did is we tried to simulate this phenomenon. You understand that experiments are very difficult because everything that you would put there would not be able to create detailed measurements because cavitation will destroy it. We got the bubbles. The big pressure that you see in the middle is the pressure. This is the first time that someone has done more than 100 bubbles. We did about 1 million or 10,000 bubbles. And actually, this is one of the historic simulations in fluid mechanics, if you want, because it has outperformed everything else that exists, including my former colleagues at Stanford in other places in the US. And this is the amount of petaflops that we can achieve, and the amount of bubbles, and the amount of compression. And this was the winner of the Gordon Bell Award in 2013. This is the America's Cup, if you like. And the America's Cup has been won twice by Swiss people, Thomas Schulters, and by ourselves. And the only other country that has won it besides Americans is China last year, so that you can appreciate the achievement of this. And this was done by 3 people in a room down here in Clausiusstrasse. Now, we take Moore's law, and Moore's law is what we have been talking about, the growth of computing power, and then there is Eroom's law. Perhaps you can understand why it's called Eroom's law, and it's about the pharma industry. And in the pharma industry, you look at the amount of money that people are spending, and you look at the number of new drugs that are being developed, and you find out that the traditional ways that they have been developing drugs and other such systems is not very effective, and it's going to the opposite of Moore's law. That's why it's called the Eroom's law. So we try to complement experiments and theory, and we try to address a problem called circulating tumor cells to detect cancer metastasis. What is cancer metastasis? Is when the tumors, they solicit blood vessels to bring oxygen to them, then at the same time they disintegrate, they enter into the bloodstream, and then they're able to metastasize. 90% is the deaths because of metastasis, but then you have to try to detect those cells, and you have to detect 1 circulating tumor cell in 1 billion red blood cells. Here is a wonderful project by a colleague at Harvard University, Mehmet Toner, that he created this device where you're putting posts down, and then you're taking advantage of the different sizes between the white blood cells and the tumor cells and the red blood cells. And by using a fluid mechanical system, you're able to separate the bigger elements from the smaller elements. And this is another one of these one-of-a-kind simulations, and it's again one of these world records where we are able to simulate up to 0.2 milliliters of blood by looking at every single red blood cell and going into sub-micron resolution for every single red blood cell. And then we take simulations like this, and we can help the design of these devices to complement the experiment. So here we spike 1 single circulating tumor cell, and we try to see if the proof of concept that Mehmet Toner and his people have developed is actually valid. So you perform the simulations, you are looking at a sub-micron resolution in millimeter-long devices. You can do the math to understand the amount of computations that are going in there. So the simulation proceeds, and eventually, here is a homage to a movie. You remember this movie with the little submarine? I forget the name. The Fantastic Voyage. And finally, eventually, you start the circulating tumor cell in silico here, and then actually, indeed, it is separating. Now, there is more to simulation that is interesting, and this is about now another topic. We go to nanotubes. You hear about nanotechnology. So here is the size of 1 nanometer. Size of 1 nanometer is right here, and these are 2 micrometer long nanotubes, and people have come up with ideas that if you push water through these carbon nanotubes, you can get huge enhancement ratios. And if you look at the numbers, there is a metric of how fast water can flow into carbon nanotubes. The length over the distance is one size that people are looking at. What is interesting here is that you look at experimental results that you have. These are data. And the experimental results about the same phenomena, even by the same group, are 5 orders of magnitude different. Okay, it's the difference between saying that someone says this is 1 kilo, and the other says, no, this is 1 ton, and another guy says, no, this is 100 tons. And these are data that appear in Nature and Science, and the more fancy the number you have, the better it is for you. So we will not complain too much about experimentalists today, but I would like to tell you that also simulation people are culprits of this problem. So you've seen all these movies, but you can ask what goes on behind these movies. What goes on behind these movies is models like this. There are parameters, and you can ask me, where do you get the epsilon? Who gives you the sigma? Why 12? Okay? And there's more details. When you put things in the computer, things get more corrupted. And when you actually try to calibrate the data, they have uncertainties. So when you try to combine all these different issues, uncertainties in simulation and uncertainties in experiments, there's big scientific problems. Let me give you an example. Let's say you take a droplet of water and you want to predict how it's going to sit on top of graphene. Depending what paper you read, you're going to find a different contact angle. You're going to find that the droplet doesn't like the graphene, or that the droplet, that's what the zero angle means, actually lays completely wetting the graphene. So how do you choose? So one thing that has become evident is that we need to address uncertainty in all the models that we have, in all the predictions, and the way we address uncertainty is data-driven uncertainty, and what we are trying to do is to follow ideas from probability theory. And now here's the classical Bayesian model. You write an equation like that, except that A and B now is a formal way of relating hypotheses and models with data. A is what's the probability of a model given the particular data you calibrate it with. And you do that by formulating likelihoods, priors, and to do all these kind of things you have to spend a lot of computer time. And what I want to tell you is that what we do in science is very imperfect, and the knowledge that we acquire is imperfect, and we have to be honest about the imperfection that science has, in particular when it comes to the digital. Just because you always put X and Y comes out, or 2X comes out, doesn't mean there is not a lot of uncertainties. There is uncertainties on people collecting data. There is uncertainties on how we model, how we put it in the computer. And when you combine all these things, you have to realize the imperfection of humanity, or the imperfection of everything that I have shown you today. So the way we do it is we calibrate, we create probability distributions, and whenever we make a prediction in terms of probability, and we say, given that I calibrated with this, this is the probability of how fast the water is flowing in carbon nanotubes. And if I may go back to this diagram that I showed you earlier, what is becoming interesting here is that these are earlier experiments that people were doing. After we published results disputing of the experimental results, the experimentalists, they redid, and we quantified our uncertainties, the experimentalists, they redid their experiments, and they find now that they agree with the simulations. And that's actually something that you have to start to worry. What about all this data that is out there for which no simulations exist, or where the two things do not agree with each other? I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. So this is something that I claimed once in a faculty meeting in my department of mechanical engineering here, and I got into a lot of trouble as a computational person, but I will repeat it. They told us that the Collegium has to be revolutionary. So let me be an easy revolutionary by appealing to Sir Arthur Eddington that says that experimentalists will be surprised that we need a theory. We need to understand when someone tells you, here is the data. Why is the data what it is? And finally, the other thing, it's serving another purpose, Werner Heisenberg, but what he says, it's actually so true, that everything that you try to measure is not necessarily what it is, but it's subject to the method of your questioning. You may have a centimeter that you can measure centimeters, and you say 0.5 centimeters. Another one has millimeters. It's another number. So it's very important to keep these things in our mind. So we play this game of data and models and predictions, though, and we do MRIs, and we create models, and we do predictions, and we create all these frameworks that I told you. And what is fantastic about that is they can actually go not only predict where is the growth of tumors and try to give some guidance to doctors. This is a brain tumor. doctors are not always able to excise the tumor, and they need some guidance as to where the tumor is. That's where you need a model, but the model is guided by the data. But we can also do crazy things. I was recently spending some time at Harvard, and I met actually an archaeologist, and finally my Greek soul felt at peace, because I had to do something with archaeology in my research. And the question of this archaeologist is, when did people started to eat meat? And for people to eat meat, the claim is they have to kill the animal. If you kill the animal, maybe there are marks on the bones of the animals. So can you find out what marks on the bones of the animals have been done by weapons versus have been done by other, like weather and other things? So we did that. We took deep neural nets like everybody, and we separate marks from nature, marks from humans eating meat. We can date and time all these different numbers. And what actually is remarkable is that the neural nets are outperforming anything that archaeologists could do and distinguish. So we are able to quantify interesting questions as to when people, for example, started to eat meat. But this is not new, and I would like to be reminded of that. So I would like to show you a little video again.
Now what are they doing? Showing the computer the alphabet for the first time?
Yes, in just the same way the teacher did with a child. Incidentally, for convenience, you see we're using P's and W's too.
Okay, now we have those characters in the machine. We'll try some tests with them. W. Call it a D. It's pretty poor, but on the other hand, it doesn't have much knowledge. Well, here's a P for it.
That's machine learning back then. He calls it again a B.
Should get it this time. Wow.
Well, now that's luck. That's pure luck.
No, as a matter of fact, one thing the computer can't do is fool the teacher. On the next try, look at the line below the letter. The longer the line, the surer the computer is of its answer.
Good enough. That's a pretty good percentage, as indicated by that bottom bar. 80%, sure. That's pretty good.
How do you call that learning? Well, I know that if my wife and I saw our kids going through that process, we'd call it learning. So, machines really can learn.
You know, we don't really know much about the thought processes, and this is why I'm so hesitant. But we are studying the problem. It's being studied in very many places and by people in many disciplines.
You mean psychologists, psychiatrists, philosophers, and so on?
Yes, and electrical engineers and mathematicians.
And what is amazing about this piece is not that machine learning started in the 1960s, but what Jerome Wissner, who was then later the president of MIT, is saying, we don't call it learning because we don't understand what learning is. And today you hear a lot about machine learning, learning. And I would appreciate if we go back and cherish the humbleness and the statements by Jerome Wissner, because I think this could bring us back to actually find out indeed what is learning. So, but we apply machine learning, and this is some of the things that we have been doing with machine learning. We have been looking at viruses, and long before people started tracking cars, we had been tracking viruses. I got into this project because I met Ari Helenius, and Ari Helenius had a student back then, Lucas Pelkmans, and Lucas was conducting his PhD, and for his PhD thesis, he would take 10 trajectories of viruses and try to make statistical analysis, and he will do that all by hand. He will take the videos, and by hand, he will track the trajectories, which was absurd. We automated the process, and not only we automated the process, we could do thousands and hundreds of thousands of trajectories. We could actually classify them and find out all these different colors to tell you what kind of trajectories you are watching. And the particular trajectories, so here is what people are doing today with cars. We had been doing it before. So now, besides the learning, there's other things you can learn from nature. So in order to find out what viruses were doing, we applied a method which is called inference. And I have many ways that I can show you what inference is, but I will show you this example of a bug doing inference in a major problem that he is facing. So there is this guy, and he's having his dirt ball, and he has a big problem because he cannot move his dirt ball. So he tries to push to get his dirt ball, and you can see that he tries the way that he always knew, and he always almost gets it there, but it doesn't really work. This is a 3-minute video that I have cut down, so don't worry. So you see, he almost gets it. Not close. Then he will go around. So he tries different things. He experiments with the thing. He tries to learn. He adapts. He almost got it, but he misses the idea. But the long story is that this guy is able to solve this problem and by interacting with the environment. And this idea of learning to solve problems is an idea of optimization where you specify a cost function and then you try to find out what is really going on in there to specify this particular cost function. So looking at the viruses, what is not possible to know is how viruses move, and viruses move in microtubules. So let's watch how things move in microtubules. So the way things move in microtubules is because proteins attach to them. They move on the microtubules, and they can move either one way or the other way. And indeed, you can do that, but then what you try to do is you try to find out how many of these proteins do you have attached. So the way we do that is we specify a model, and then we try to find out what are the parameters of the model, and we do that by looking at the trajectories, creating probability distributions of the trajectories, and then saying if the real trajectories have a certain probability distribution of velocity and length of the trajectories, can you find out parameters of the model that they match these trajectories? And we do that, and the algorithm does that, and we are able to move on with that, and we are able to find out what are the mechanisms. It's a stochastic tug of war. But what we were able to do with that, which was actually quite unique, not only to find how many motors are attached, but we were actually able to find out where these things are attaching themselves. And then there are different sites where they could bind. And then we went and we told the biologists of what they need to knock out. And then we found actually, a priori, before biologists found, that you find that this is the hexon interfaces. That's where the proteins are attaching. And if you knock these out, then the viruses are not able to go into the cell. We did a lot of other things with that, and the other thing that I like very much is this computation of behavior, because you can look at people doing things, and the question is, by looking at what they are doing, can you extract their behavior? This is what Google does actually to you, and I would like to show you, not in terms of Google, but I would like to show you that it's possible to understand what someone is doing. So here you see two fish, and one big fish is trying to eat a smaller fish, and that's what is this thing going on in there. And the way this thing is happening is, here's a slow motion video. You see how the big fish tries to catch the little guy, but the little guy escapes. And what is interesting is to see how the little guy escapes. If you look at the motion that he does, it's not exactly a motion of a fish, but he does a very funny movement of his body. Well, this is something that fish are doing all the time, and whenever they get this disturbed, these are small fish, what they do is they bend their body. So the question is, why do they bend their body? And if they bend their body, is this an evolutionary trait? Is there something that evolution has prepared? So we try to understand this. So you can do any experiment you want, and it would be very difficult to do this reverse engineering, but you can go in the computer, and you can go in the computer and get a fish, and then parameterize the motion of the fish, and then specify different objectives, and say, for this objective, how does the fish move? For that objective, how does the fish move? So you have the tools to do that. So we specified an objective, try to escape as far as you can. And here's the plots that we look at. You start with something that doesn't really escape very much, and then in an automated fashion, we discover that if you want to escape, actually, you have to be doing this C-start, which is something that we have not been able to examine before. We find that it is optimum. We have the first time optimum of nature. We have evidence, and we have explanation. These guys, they have a very small tail. They cannot move a lot of fluid, so they try to grab as much fluid as they can, and then they push it away. And we do more things with fish, and this is towards the end of all the simulations that I'm doing. There is a paper in Science that I have been chasing for years, because the key author there is Greek, so you have to do better than your fellow Greeks. He made the cover of Science, and we try for that. So he found out that trouts, they sit behind rocks, and they sit behind rocks and they like it, and they are able to do that because it decreases their muscle activity. So for the first time, we're able to put 2 swimmers in a computer, and the second swimmer has actually learned to follow the first swimmer in a totally automated fashion. And for that, this is a simulation involving a complex system, which is the Navier-Stokes equations, and something which is called deep reinforcement learning. It may not look like much to you, but I'm extremely proud and happy to have seen this before the end of my career. So now computing, let's get away from simulations and tell you that computing is in fact not only what we do as scientists, it's what we do all the time. You are computing me at this time, you are thinking about what I'm saying, do you believe it, do you believe it not? But you're also doing a lot of other calculations, and according to Daniel Kahneman, there's 2 modes of computing in people's heads. One is the slow mode and the other one is the fast mode. So the slow mode is, the fast mode is when you look at me and you say, I wear a black shirt, or my name is Petros, if you remember. You may have a harder time with my last name, so this is where the slow mode starts to kick in. And if you ask me whether I like my fellows, or you want to think about that, you need to really spend some energy. And people are lazy. People don't want to spend energy. People go usually for the fast thing, which is the first reaction. So this is the Fast and Slow. This is from Daniel Kahneman. It's a fantastic book. It shows you the irrational behavior that people have. And I would like to tell you that in what we do in computers, very often we have to solve equations like that. This is the slow part. This is the fast part. And when we do the equations, we have methods of doing that by turning on and off the fast and the slow mode and alternating. So I'm not saying that this is a mode of thinking. Psychologists may want to be involved, but it works very well for equations that you can actually solve equations very, very fast. And you have to engage your slow mode for be able to understand what I'm saying here. I understand. Now, so let me summarize about computing. So computing is not only the results that you see, but it's a way of thinking. It goes from data to insight to knowledge. It's about how you work. This agile development is important, and it has challenges. So it's about computational thinking, and that's actually what I'm advocating, and I'm not the first one who advocates it. And I would like to actually tell you that computational thinking is what actually I would propose that we use in order to overcome this data deluge that we are faced today. And it's actually a slow mode of thinking. It requires energy. It requires that we spend time. But I would like to argue that all these lessons that I hope I showed you their power in simulating different phenomena can be a solution for problems that we have in other domains. So computing, I believe, has become like writing or speaking. Computing is harder than producing or experiencing data, and it has limited adoption by many fields, and I think there is a great opportunity there. So let's touch the point of machines thinking for a moment. So here is my friend.
Even the scientists argue that.
I don't believe that we can say yet that machines do think. I have a basic question which I always ask, and that is, are these producing anything really new? Until I see a machine producing genuinely new things, I will not agree that machines think.
I confidently expect that within a matter of 10 or 15 years, something will emerge from the laboratories which is not too far from the robot of science fiction fame.
So this is Claude Shannon, and Claude Shannon is the famous Claude Shannon of information theory, and he will come back. So all this story about machines thinking comes from this paper by Turing, and I'm not sure if many people have read this paper, whether machines can think. There's the movie of the Imitation Game, but maybe there is a great statement by Turing, which shows actually his class, that he asked actually himself, is this really worth it? Does it really worth it to bother about thinking whether machines think? And he has a great diatribe on that that's actually worthy to investigate. And I would like to build on it, and I would like to add some arguments from several domains where there is this way that we have to be replaced about machines, and we are scared that machines will take over. And I would like to say that what computers do, and what I have shown you that computers are doing, are only one dimension of the human intelligence. So human intelligence is not only about doing logical and mathematical functions and doing pattern recognition, but we have also ways in which we move, we do music, we are interpersonal, we are verbal and linguistic. So I think that humans are not computers. And I think the Turing test, the imitation game, is that if two people play a game there and one tries to guess which one is the computer and which is not, that's the Turing test. There's many other tests that people can put forward. And here is a great test by Horst Simon. And I don't know if many of you have ever experienced it. Give to a computer robot the instructions from an IKEA and then see if the computer is able to do that. I'm sure the IKEA would love to have such a computer and sell it and market it, but until we see that, I think we will still have to struggle in our furniture. And another thing about information and machine learning. Claude Shannon himself, he actually said that information theory is not a global panacea and that expectations should be too great of them. And I think the same thing should happen with all this machine learning and the machines. There's also more things that I would like to discuss, and the more things that I would like to discuss is actually that our minds are not perfect. We have all sorts of problems, and when people more and more behavioral psychologists, they find new things about our mind, they find that we are actually, it's not about thinking straight, but it's more about beating our fellow colleagues and about winning arguments. So do we want a computer that we train it to think like that? What if he tries to do something that we don't like? And another thing I want to show you, it's actually that our senses that we try to impose on computers may be actually failing. So if maybe of you maybe have seen this test.
Professor Wiesner, I've seen this before. Now, that window isn't square. You see, one side is longer than the other.
Yes, but no matter how many times you've seen it, I bet you still can't see through the illusion.
So can you see this rotating?
What's the window doing now?
It's revolving. I know it's revolving.
Of course it is. But I'm certain that you don't see it that way. You see it as though it were oscillating back and forth.
So there's no trick.
Right.
It's straight filming, and no human brain can see that.
Anything that is longer is closer to you, and your experience tends to confirm this. So you have to see the long side of the window as though it were in front, even when it's in back. You just can't see it revolve.
And the way they do it is
they cover the window with a cloth. The cloth sides are equal in length. Now maybe your brain will let you see the window rotate. Look at the bottom corner of the cloth. Now do you see it revolve?
Yes, I do.
And what I would like to say is that it's not only seeing is believing, but also believing is seeing. And also when we go and we talk these days about the truth, we also do other things, and in particular these things have been exasperated by computers. And it's about the knowledge, and that the knowledge that we have in our heads is not only anymore in our heads. And I told you earlier that I no longer program or compute because my students do, and this is our shared knowledge. I believe that I do other tasks, but consider for yourself one of the examples that they say here, and the example is that you know that the Earth is going around the Sun, but if I ask you to reproduce the astronomical calculations that lead to that, I think it's not going to be so easy for people to do it, but you can go to the library and pick up the right book to do that. So the story is that supercomputers and brains are not the same thing, and the other thing that should be important is not that whether machines think, but whether men do, and actually what eventually we try to do to thinking machines already are surrounding the humans, and this is back from the 60s from Skinner. And one more thing, I told you earlier about computers, and I told you that computers in terms of frequencies and powers, they're moving in that direction. But if you look at the poor brain, actually, it's actually in the, I did it wrong, it's actually in the wrong, it's one slide back, I will do it like that. So the brain actually, instead of being back there, is down here. So we have to shift the paradigm and start to think differently in making computers for that. I'd like to close with some thoughts on data and society, and it will be very few thoughts, and I will borrow from others because I'm neither an expert on either of these topics. So I would like to expose to you in some of the ideas that I have appreciated and that people have been talking about for the level of discussion. So there is no question, I believe, that this adventure of data and applications, etc., can really save lives and can do a lot of things better for our lives. But at the same time, I would like us that we pay attention to asymmetry of information. And asymmetry of information is that when you order an Uber, for those of you who have ever ordered Uber, you know roughly what's going on from what Uber is providing you as information, but Uber knows a lot more information about what's going on around you and actually can even prevent you from accessing Uber overall. They had a recent case where they were avoiding different governments where they were illegal. So the story is that this asymmetric information is becoming problematic. We are the people who produce the information, and at the same time, this information does not belong to us. The pie is getting bigger, but this inequality of information distribution is becoming bigger. And when you consider information as currency, maybe you start to worry whether you should start to regulate. And as I said, there's people who talk about that. He's a professor of computer science. And it says that computing alone doesn't solve social problems. And the way he does that is by looking at the difference between the Matrix, the movie, and the Facebook. Advanced technology, human energy versus human attention, feed machine masters versus feeding shareholders, while offering illusion of a pleasant life, while offering illusion of a pleasant life. And what is interesting is to hear the people from Facebook talking about how machine learning is used.
Different for people. How's it changed Facebook, the platform? Making Facebook different for people. How's it changed Facebook, the platform?
Yeah, I think, AI and machine learning is really a key tool to help people manage just the tremendous amount of information you see every day. Every single time you log into Facebook, there are hundreds or possibly thousands of things your friends have shared that we could show you. And our job is to try to find the absolute things that are the best and most interesting to you, the things you want to see, and show them to you, so we don't waste any moment of your time, or more importantly, miss something.
I think you appreciate. And there's also comments that comes out of there. And then we're talking about information inequality, and then here is a comment about inequality by Mark Zuckerberg. He says, richest 500 million people have way more money than the next 6 billion combined. You solve that by getting everyone online, okay? And people have argued very much about that. And actually, here is Hillary Clinton also telling us that information networks are making governments more accountable. And you know where that got here. And I would like to question, much as Professor Taoyama there is questioning, what is the effect of all this technology into things that matter for people? I told you earlier about poverty, water, complexity, and energy. So let's look at all the advances of Internet, Microsoft, Facebook, and this is the number of poor people on Earth. You see no particular change on what has happened and what is the effect of digital technology. You can see in all these other things that we computing people do, there is no change. And you can look at philanthropy. These people are making billions. How much more money they give back? Okay, nothing has changed. So what's the impact of this, and what's the impact of IT in our lives? And people disagree with that. And famous computer scientist is the president of the Association of Computer Machinery. That's the article I read. And he says this is either a hopelessly naive or an utterly self-serving statement. And what is interesting that's happening today is that productivity is increasing thanks to computers, but at the same time, if you remember Moore's law, productivity is indeed increasing, but now instead of the performance of computers, the hourly compensation that is going down, and this is another gap. Other things that are interesting is how the particular scores, this is an American metric, is relating to parental incomes, and of course the more money you make, the higher is the score of your kids. So there is a self-reinforcing problem in the society that the richer get richer and go to all the best schools. And there's more problems with the data. And there's more problems with the data, as you may have seen in the recent US elections. There is a big activity that's going on in the US at the moment about people who are trying to rescue data. There's hackathons where people trying to take data away from governments and to try to get all this information about their environmental data and to try to protect them in certain areas. So we produce something that we give it for free to other people, and then eventually, if we want to get it back, it's not like the bank. It's like the bank has your data and then doesn't want to give them back to you whenever you need them. And there is a great article that I'd like to recommend that you read. It's from people from ETH. It's from my colleague Dirk Helbin and Ernst Hafen and others, which actually outline in a very specific way how this big data and artificial intelligence are actually endangering democracy. And there is also more people talking about that. This is a professor of Harvard that I had an opportunity to listen to his talk. And he says, when governments are gone, other interests will take their place. And a culture without property or in which creators can't get paid, it's anarchy, not freedom. So you have to worry and consider the data you create and that you give freely, and I give freely, who gets profit from them and what do we get back. There is more that I would like to say. Here is another great idea. It's actually about replacing professors. And it's the idea that, you know, you don't anymore try to think of problems in the hierarchical way of studying one thing after the other. But what you do is you get as much data as possible, then you don't do any theory and you begin analyzing the data. And then you have a machine there like Alexa or Siri, and Siri today tells you, you know, go look for this movie. But now tomorrow Siri will tell to my students, you know, go work on this problem because the data is guiding you to this problem. I think actually this is not a bad idea. I think it's a great idea because often if I want to actually come up with sources of ideas, I also look on the internet. I also do stupid work looking left and right, who published what. So I think there's great potential to use these expert systems, and I would like to actually say that it's not only bad things that can happen from Google and Facebook and others, or things that we have to be careful about, but I think great ideas and ideas out of the box can come out of there that I think are worth to investigate. I think it would be wonderful that maybe instead of us just being hypothesis generators, we actually go down and with the knowledge that we have, go back to programming and to working with people in solving problems in alternative ways than just surfing the net. So what should the students be learning? Closing with something hopefully positive. So this is from a famous cartoon that is in the US. So basically is people posing questions, and the guy over there can answer anything by looking into the internet. So you can get answers much faster than any human can give you, and you get it in less than seconds. So now the clue is that search is a lot faster than trying to remember. And the question is, why go to the university? Well, basically, the party hasn't changed, so you have to go there to party. But I think it's important to remember other things that make humans humans. And it's not only search. We don't do only search. And I think it's worthy to go back and to revisit some fundamental aspects of humanity. And here are some statements that I like. And I like in particular the last one. It's education is what survives when what has been learned has been forgotten. And I think this is an axiom that I believe no machine will ever be able to have such an education, but I think many of us are able to pursue this kind of goals. So what really matters? Do all of us have to be connected? And to what really matters, I found a wonderful speech that was done back in the 1968, I don't remember exactly the date, by Robert Kennedy. And the data here, it was talking about the gross national product of the United States. And he basically, what he says is that when you know about the gross national product, or maybe you can take it about other data, you don't know about the health of our children, the quality of their education, the joy that you get when you play. You don't get anything about the beauty of poetry, the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate. So there's all these things that make humans human that I believe you can never teach to a computer and you can never translate them to pure data. So in brief, I think we are safe. So let me close by telling you that I advocate that we go into the slow mode of our brain and we do computing. We Computing is a great thing that helps you to talk between different disciplines, can even talk to people who do data science, and it's a joint framework, and above all else, it's an education. I very much support the idea of having everything open, that you give open software, that you make ideas open, because nobody would ever be able to take them and hide them and do whatever they want with them. And I think if you have created even a little part in a project, I think your contribution should be felt, and I see no better way than having everything open. So open science, journals that we don't have to pay for, all these kind of wonderful things that people in Swiss National Science Foundation and other places are talking about, I think something that it would be great to pursue in every way possible. There's more ideas about computers and the like, but I would like to close with a comment about digital society. I think our society is not digital or analog or anything you want to do, but I believe that the digital should be in the service of humanity. And what we should try to understand and to communicate to people is this particular interconnection between science, society, data, and computers, and we should try to advocate about human and scientific-centric approaches. I told you about uncertainties that we have in data. I told you about misuse of computers. I think many of these things should be taught, should be open, should be advertised so people can learn and acquire their own opinions about that. And we should not forget basic principles of humanity, of remaining free, of being able to have access to our property, and of having a fair treatment from our peers and our governments is a very important thing that should not be sacrificed for any data or any computer. And the last slide is that computers are what you think they are. So if you see this slide, can you tell me what kind of a bird this is? What kind of a bird does it look like? Would you be okay if I say it's a goose? Okay, now let's take this slide out, and let's bring this slide back in from the other side, and would you be okay if I tell you that the same shape is a hawk? And indeed, this is something that people do in behavioral psychology, and computers can be either a peaceful bird or a very aggressive bird, and it depends how are we addressing it, how we perceive it, how we look at it. And with that, I would like to thank you, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Danke, Petros, für dieses Feuerwerk, das uns von der Unsicherheit über das Imperfekte, über die Frage, was Lernen ist, über Computing as Way of Thinking, über das Fast and Slow Thinking, über die Frage, wem Information gehört, über das Thema von Phobie und Euphorie, das uns sozusagen bei jeder, nicht nur technologischen Innovation begleitet und steuert, ganz viel Denkstoff gegeben hat. Und ich hoffe jetzt, dass die Zuhörenden und Mitdenkenden im Rudolf-Wolf-Saal, so sie denn Fragen an dich haben, ebenfalls hier in den Raum kommen, und würde gerne das Wort schon einmal den hier Sitzenden zum Fragen, zum Rückfragen, zum Kommentieren, zum Ergänzen, zum noch weiter Ausholen öffnen.
Und auf Deutsch ist auch okay, ja, für mich.
Das war schnell auf Griechisch, genau, hin und her.
You had the word property on your last slide. So who owns the data? The person who generates it, like me when I shop with a bonus card? Or the persons or organizations who collect the data?
I think both have investment on this data, right? Because to collect data, you have to create some kind of infrastructure, you have invested something, so eventually when you go and you deposit your data there, they also have some part that supposedly belongs to them. And you also make a choice, if there is a choice. So if you have more than one place where you can go and deposit your data, I think you can say that you made the choice of going to this particular place to put your data, and therefore you made your own calculations whether this is beneficial to you. But at the bottom of all this is that the data is your data, and what I would like to advocate is that the data is your money. And you're giving the data and you get something in return. And what you give to Google is you give your location, you give what you're searching, and what you get back is you get traffic information, you get great resources to do research, they're doing machines, they create software, they're doing a lot of things. So the thing that is important is not only to whom the data belongs, but there is an exchange, and someone should go and study what is the economics of this exchange, and is this a fair exchange of what's going on. At the moment, this is unregulated. It's happening on a haphazard way. We have things like bitcoins and other things flying around. I think at some point, the more and more we exchange information and companies are making a lot of money out of data, the economics of that should appear. I would even go as far as saying that perhaps people or other companies should be taxed about data usage that they do, not only in terms of monetary, but also potential. And certainly the thing which is not ethical, I believe, is to, once you give your data, that you have no more access to them. So Google probably knows where I have been the last month or so. I do not. I do not have this. And I would like to go back and be able to ask for that because I generated that. Sure, I gave it. I received something in return. So this openness, these registries, I think is as important as something that we should be asking for. I hope I answered.
Ethics concerning the property of data not start at the point that I have the choice, would I pay in money or would I pay in data, which I don't have for Google. For example, I would use Google for, let's say, $135 US, concerned what my data would be worth that are gathered by Google. If I would have kind of an account where I could just put in $135, otherwise Google wouldn't store my data, the problem would be solved because it would be my decision as the, let's say, the governor of my life in data. I would have the decision, would I pay in data or money? So I think the ethical problem starts at that point that I've got no choice for it. So do you see there a chance that something is developing?
I think ethics is the right word. I'm happy that you brought it up. I think ethics of information exchange is extremely important. I believe that I'm not in a position to discuss ethics and provide you rules as to what is ethical, what is not ethical. I think this is, in fact, a fantastic topic where we have to include philosophers, social scientists, and other people who can actually discuss with technology people ethics. Because a lot of what's happening in technology has been translated into numbers and signals and data, but there is ethics behind. And I think the word ethics should actually precede the word data, and we should become more and more aware. Whether I can give a solution to your particular issue, I don't think I'm in a position to do that. But I thank you for your question, because I think what is fantastic these days is that we can go back and rethink philosophy, rethink ethics, rethink all the social aspects that I think we have left on the side as we march along with all these things we do with computers left and right. And when you do things with computers and you do science, yes, there is issues of ethics in science. There are people who publish data, and 60% of the papers published in Science and Nature are not reproducible. Is that ethical? Is there an issue there? I think there is an issue there. Things should be open, should be perhaps not exactly reproducible, but you should say what you have done. 5 orders of magnitude in an experiment, and repeating the experiment and publishing again that you have 2 orders of magnitude error. Is that ethical? I think it's great to have this conversation, and if I can give you one more positive thing out of where we live today, I think this is great to reintegrate with philosophers and social scientists on this particular topic. And I'm particularly thankful for being in the Collegium to have such an opportunity.
Danke für den Werbespot.
That's true.
Okay, my question perhaps goes into a different direction. It's more basic. I'm a slow thinker, so you say slow thinking is important. It's all about the term computing. I mean, you are an advocate to say computing. Now, let me try to explain how I see this picture. There are several dimensions, but I'm going to think along 2 dimensions. One dimension is whether you have a basic theory or not. Navier-Stokes is a basic theory. In other areas, perhaps in medicine, many parts of biology, we don't have a basic theory. Mm-hmm. That is one dimension. The other dimension is that before computers, even if you had a basic theory, we could not do certain calculations because the capacity of our brain is not enough, it's too slow. And now we can combine these 2 dimensions. Mm-hmm. And my question is, what was for you in the past a big step? Was it the step to go from basic theory subjects, like you did in your research, Navier-Stokes, and suddenly you could calculate things which you could never do before? Or is the big step that you may make yourself free from a basic theory and say, I don't care about the basic theory, I just handle data as it has been done before as well. I mean, we know that it's not, but we can now do that is the computer. What is this big revolution about the computing which you have in mind?
I believe both. and I think we are talking in the end about 2 different types of successes. And I'm borrowing here from some statements and something that I saw from Noam Chomsky. So Noam Chomsky, he gives this idea that you can have different successes. And one success is that I have the Navier-Stokes. I take the Navier-Stokes, I can do predictions. And then, by having these predictions, I can go and do particular explanations, and I can try to understand things. And this can have some benefit for me, and this is fantastic. And indeed, computers are able to advance things that we were not able to do before. But the fundamental things is, for me, that someone came up with a theory of the Navier-Stokes, and the fact that I have now a computer, all that it does, it allows me to go and to look into physics. So without the theory, I would not be anywhere, but with the theory and the computer, I can understand some physics. So first the theory, then the computer, then the physics in this particular case. Now, the second thing of a success story is the data. Okay, I get some data, and I get some data about the weather, and the weather in Bern was yesterday cloudy, and so and so. And then, so I can make an estimate that tomorrow this weather is coming to Zürich, so the weather is going to be so and so. Okay, so this is, I don't necessarily understand how the clouds are moving. I don't have an explanation about the meteorology. I don't know anything, but I can make an estimate about the weather. And that's also a success, because for some people, they don't necessarily care about the explanation. So in this particular second case, the only reason that we are able to do that is because of computers. And before, we could put all sorts of assumptions about data, but we didn't have enough data, and we didn't have computers. So this has happened only because of computers. So in the case of the statistical inference, as I call it, computers go first. And one more thing to distinguish the 2, again, quoting Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky says there's people who talk about machine learning and all these kind of things. So sometimes when you hear these people, you think that there will be a building, and the people will put video cameras on the building looking out. They will collect all sorts of movies, and then you will find out about the physics, and you will no longer need a physics department. You will need a bigger and bigger building for the computer science department. And I think this is possible for certain problems, but I think in general, as humans, we use explanation, one, because we want to predict, we want to make money, because we want to do all sorts of things, but also I think it's also in our nature. I have a curiosity why these vortices are the way they are. Why does the blood go around? I think you probably also have curiosities about other things. And I think theory, logic, the way humans think and the way our brain thinks is what gives us pleasure. And in the end, that's in the end why we do what we do. Nobody tortures me to think about theory, otherwise I wouldn't do it. So if you want my personal opinion, I will put theory and understanding before any computer ever. But if I want to win on Texas poker, I would buy this machine.
I'm even slower. Even slower. Yeah, even slower. But back in the early 50s, when the first automated computer was introduced to the public, Edgar Mockley claimed that this was a machine that was not only computing, despite its name. It was a machine that helped to solve any problem that was concerned with sorting, classifying, calculating, and decision-making. Later on, one would claim it also helped to solve the problem of communication. Now, you might say, that is not important for my field because I still need a computer as a computer, so that is what I'm doing with the computer. I am computing numbers, figures, and I try to use brute force technology in order to get smart solutions for difficult problems. Your part is clear, but I want to point to the fact that for a lot of people, buying computers, using computers, living under the threat of computers or enjoying computers, a computer became less and less a machine concerned with calculation and properly speaking, computing other things. Computers do other things than computing.
Sure.
Yeah. Is this perhaps something that helps us to better understand the relation between society and data, for instance? Yeah. Then the concentration on the computing line, the line you showed, the Moore's line, for instance, Moore's law line you painted, and the bad luck programmers had with their software development.
So, I mean, indeed, the computers are becoming something else than computers, and I can tell you that myself. If I don't have my smartphone, sometimes I feel addicted, and where's my smartphone? And I don't use it to do any computations, but I have created a relationship that a lot of things about my life depend on this particular device. It is a computer. Sure, it is a computer.
It helps you sort out your relations, for instance.
Sure. Now, if you want a personal opinion, when I don't have it, if I go on holidays and someone takes it away from me, I can still live. And after a few days, I can live even better. And what I'm arguing is, and I'm arguing to myself also, is that it would be interesting to rethink this relationship. And I think the tools of computing, how you write software, how do you take math and you combine them to write a program, and how do you analyze data to take a decision, this can help you re-examine the relationship with the computer that you just described, and which I consider to be, in a sense, pathological perhaps, losing control of things we have, usually under control, losing control of time, losing control of freedom, losing control of initiative. And if you go back to principles of computing, these other Moore's, how do you write software, abstractions, handling complexity, it's more difficult. It's very difficult, but I think it's something we should try to pursue and try to understand, to see how maybe we can recover our humanity by going through back to human way of processing information and translating information.
So one prerequisite to use the data is to have it in a digitized form. Now, in Switzerland, for example, in healthcare, I think we're lagging behind other countries when we consider electronic medical records that are implemented in other countries, and in Switzerland it's not even mandatory in the coming years. So do you think this is a problem of society, that Switzerland is not, from the people living here, not ready for that? Or do you think, what would be a good strategy to bring Switzerland again to the front?
Who is in front at the moment?
I think Nordics, for example.
Nordics, and what do they do there? What do you consider in front?
I mean, there every interaction they have with a doctor is like electronically recorded, so you can use this data to make, for example, in these tools that recognize skin cancers, you need data to train the computers, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have this data, how do you want to train them?
I think at some point we need governance, and we need governments that they have to go and provide regulations. I support the idea of having this information in a digital form. I support the idea of having the possibility to explain it, to exploit it for the betterment of the people that provided this data. But I think people have to think the implications and 5 steps further down as to what else does this mean. And we live in a wonderful country that I believe has many democratic principles, but I'm not sure that you can always think what's going to happen 50 years ahead, what happens to your data. And once you have your data digitized and everything, do you want to have your data forever there? People today are buying the right to be forgotten in Europe. So there are some people that maybe don't want to have their data. How do you distinguish whose data you keep and whose data you don't keep? Do you consider the mental state of a person of giving you his data or not giving you his data? In a sense, maybe we exaggerate, but it's almost like giving blood, and you learn things about a person from that. There's other data that you give, right? So there are certain laws that refer to more material samples like blood and other things that we have, and what do you do with tissues. I went and I did a biopsy at some point, and I realized this is biopsies, and the tissues of these biopsies in Greece, they keep them for 20 years. You can go back and find your biopsy from 20 years ago and keep it. This is amazing. If it was digitized, yes, I could use it. But on the other hand, what if they give it to someone I don't want to? How do I control what they do? So maybe I complicated your question even more. In simple, I think we need governance. And I think governments and scientists and society and ethics people should sit together. Lawyers have a new kind of job. I think we can never get rid of them, to find out and to answer things like that. I think it's very important.
Well, thanks, Petros, for a lovely talk. It's been very heartening to hear of your openness to ethical issues, and also to sense your implicit trust. And if we work together with philosophers and social scientists and you technology guys, we'll be able to figure out a suitable solution, appropriate solution, for some form of governance. And I think developing core elements of such a framework is certainly beyond the scope of such an evening. But just reacting to this comment before, I think choice goes some way, but I think what's certainly a core element would be informed choice. And thinking of the many instances in which I've agreed to something on my screen which was molesting me, and I wanted to get it out of the way, so I said I agreed to whatever, the many lines above have said. And this reminds me of the early days in research ethics, actually, when we still confronted people, and to some extent this is still happening today, with huge forms, with a lot of complicated terminology, completely inaccessible to the layperson. And it's needed the push and the insistence of committees, of peers, of patient organizations to actually initiate some changes. And I'm just wondering, is this maybe also early days for information ethics? And do we need similar procedures? Do we maybe try to get some inspiration from areas such as clinical ethics, where we've learned how to better communicate, for instance, risks and benefits to a patient, from research ethics, to see what substantial, what procedural guidance might be in place, or might be something for us that we might wish to consider to develop as standards for information ethics in the future?
I think it's a very important thing. I think drawing on other places where ethics have become important is essential. And actually, I would not be even surprised if we cannot use artificial intelligence to help us in turn with ethics problems. As you were speaking, I was thinking, yes, there's all these things that you read and you sign without even reading it, but you know, what if I was able to give it to a computer and I tell the computer already a priori, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like that. He reads the whole thing and then he blinks and says, you know, this thing asks you to give off $10,000 for this cause, and I never would do that. So AI can help you in ethics questions like that. So certainly building on human knowledge, building on what we know or what we have developed in ethics is important. We have to appreciate that this medium of computers is not a calculator anymore. It's a very powerful. It lets me communicate with someone in Japan right now if I want to. It's something that we didn't have before. So we have to appreciate all these ramifications and certainly build on this other topic, or on copying from other disciplines, as you mentioned, or basing the discussion on that.
Okay, there are 2 more questions left. Is there a third one? Okay, then go on.
I think the ethical problem is quite big. In Iceland, they had recently a case where they had made DNA analysis and find out which people had more risk for cancer or some sort of cancer. And they also find out which relatives of them would have this higher probability, but they were not allowed to tell them for privacy laws. So on one side you can say, well, it's traumatic, we can't inform these people, they should start treatment or checking now. On the other side, maybe these people don't even want to know about it, want the freedom to not know.
Yep.
And secondary privacy will become, or is becoming, more and more a luxury good. Like the rich people, they can live anonymously or relatively anonymously, like Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, buying all the houses around his house, so nobody can watch his house, while we can't. And for example, the medical digital data in Denmark, there is actually, you can't opt out of it. You have to email the government or your doctor. You can't do it another way, so it's mandatory. So the question is how we do with the ethics of that, and we should find a solution there, because while we discuss ethical solutions, our discussions are recorded and analyzed and used to market the best approach for laws which are maybe not in our interests.
I mean, if we think about privacy, I very much appreciate the issue, but maybe we can think about Swiss banks also, right? I mean, that the issue of privacy was a hallmark of what it is to have an account in a Swiss bank. There was all this privacy you could have security, and we see that what happened to some parts of that because of international regulations and because of the interconnect and how easy it was for someone from country X to come in Switzerland and put his money. And as we start to run into issues, what does privacy mean in Iceland that you mentioned versus what privacy means in Switzerland or in Greece or in the United States? So they become global problems, and we need to talk. We need to talk to our fellow colleagues from other places. We need to find common solutions. I don't have one for you at the moment, but I believe this, you're raising a big issue, and it's extremely important.
We've seen a very fascinating talk about data, and we see we have a lot of ethical issues here. My question is more about fake data, or how we've learned in the past few weeks about alternative data. I mean, we're more and more confronted with a lot of fake information, and this fake information is actually the power of shaping our future. I mean, we've seen the Brexit, we've seen what has happened in the US. I mean, how do you see it in the future? I mean, is the system going to saturate even more with fake information, and what's going to be the role of computing in it? Is it going to help us?
I believe I tried to touch on this topic on 2 slides. One was to show you the discrepancies of 5 orders of magnitude. And the other was on this new book, actually, that's coming out about the shared knowledge. That the knowledge that we have is shared and we rely. So how do you believe that any of the simulations I showed you is correct if you don't go back and do it yourself in the end? Of course, I published it in a journal. Of course, peers looked at it, but they cannot control everything. So there you have to accept that we are imperfect. We have to accept that there will be mistakes. You have to accept that there is no perfect way of doing things, and you have to design for that. And engineers, usually when they design for imperfect things, they opt for robustness. They opt for redundancy. They opt for many excessive limits. So maybe we can look at how engineers design planes or other sensitive things and try to learn from that on how we design for avoiding fake news and fake data. And finally, the thing that is very important is education. In the end, you are yourself, you have a control over how much you learn, over what kind of an education you have, how much you have invested in that. And I believe harnessing through all this data, by having an education, you are able to find principles, reference points, and all these different news, you should be able more or less to check them against all sorts of things. Do we all get fooled? Of course we all can get fooled. But if there is a remedy, is perhaps to be more educated, more engaged, more active. I very much appreciate that now more and more scientists are coming up from the environment, and they say, don't destroy all this data, and they don't just spend their days in the computer just calculating something, but they come out and they have a voice. Maybe all the bad things that are happening now in different places, they would actually create some humanity which is more engaged and more interested about the public good. I'm an optimist, no matter what, about humanity, but, you know, you need to work on it.
Ja, das war konzipiert als Schlusswort. Ganz herzlichen Dank für die engagierte Diskussion, für den sehr facettenreichen Vortrag. Das Tolle ist, dass wir 4 Jahre Zeit haben, ganz vieles zu vertiefen, auf ganz vieles einzugehen. Werbung in eigener Sache. Die nächste Collegium Helveticum Lecture ist am 11. Mai, und zwar wird dann Hermann Haken über Synergetik sprechen. Selbstorganisation in komplexen Systemen, also schon mal vormerken, der große alte Mann sozusagen der Synergetik wird hier sein. Bis dahin gibt es aber noch ungefähr 1 Dutzend Möglichkeiten am Collegium, sich mit Fragen von Digital Societies auseinanderzusetzen. Bitte die üblichen Informationskanäle nutzen. Wir freuen uns, wenn wir so wie heute Abend ein volles Haus, nicht nur was Personen, sondern auch was das intellektuelle Anregungspotenzial anbelangt haben.